This is an advanced user tutorial for the timeline editor of the Viking macro software. For more information, please contact us through the support ticket system or contact our staff and other customers on our forums at www.vikingforums.com. From the Viking software homepage, to access the timeline editor, click on the film strip. And we'd like to cover a few of the basics of the timeline editor. First of all of the tracks represent different buttons down the left side. From top to bottom, we've got the left stick. That includes both analog movements and the left stick press. Right stick, same goes there. D-pad, A, B, and X, Y buttons, left bumper, left trigger, right trigger. These are both fully sensitive, so whether or not you want to emulate a press, fully pressed, halfway pressed, etc. And of course the 4 player LEDs on your controller. And those are multicolor programmable. Let's start with creating a single dot. To create a single dot, left click once. Now a single dot by itself is not an action. In other words, a single dot's not going to do anything. You really need a start and an end. So to extend a dot into an action, we right click on that dot and drag out. So in this case, we are creating a macro where the A button is pressed down. So I'm going to drag that out to 0.5 seconds. So if I were to play back this macro right now, it would press the A button for 5 seconds. And if I kept repeating that macro, it's going to play back to the very last action, which was the A button being pressed. So it'll actually look like this A button's being pressed continuously forever if you kept looping this macro over and over again. The simple buttons where the A, B, X, Y, left bumper, right bumper, where it's just a button press, that's really there's no properties. It's just a beginning and an end. If you want a second button press, you just left click to create a new dot, right click to drag it out. So now I've got the A button being pressed twice here in this track. If we skip down to the LED colors here, you'll notice when we left click to add a dot, we also see a property box. Of course, in this case with the LEDs, we also need to select a color. So in this case, we want blue. And if we want that blue to show up, we need to right click on that first dot, drag it out to create an action. And we can do that as many times as we want. To close a property box, you want to click on the dot again. So you can click on this dot to open and close that property box. And if we go here to the triggers also have a property box. The dots you create for the triggers. This red bar you can see is thicker on the left hand side, thinner on the right hand side. The thickness of this bar is supposed to represent how far you're pulling the trigger. So at the skinny end, this basically means you're not pulling the trigger at all. Over here on the thick end means you're fully pulling that trigger all the way down. And of course, 3/4 pull shown here, half pull, quarter pull. So you can simulate a lot of different levels of pressing the trigger here. And to create an action of pulling the trigger, it's going to be a little bit different here. The idea here is the software is going to tween the value from your first dot, which we show here as a full trigger press. It's going to change gradually over time until the next dot that it sees. In this case, we've got that set to completely releasing the trigger here at 0.5 seconds. So if we were to play this macro back right now, it would start with the trigger fully pressed and gradually release that over a half a second. Another interesting thing about these more advanced tracks here is you can insert a point. So for example, we could start with the trigger being fully pulled here at about 2.5 seconds. We could have the trigger being released, and then we can go to the end here and change this to fully pulled again. So just remember that the behavior is it's not fully pressed here and then released here. It's tweening gradually. So if you want to go from fully pressed and stay fully pressed, you need to add another dot here. Fully pressed, released, released. And this is probably what a lot of our first-person shooter customers are after. This would be a very simple rapid fire where you're starting with it pressed, you're holding that trigger, and you release it, and you wait another quarter of a cycle. And then if you loop this macro over and over again, you basically got your rapid fire. That's just that trigger being pressed and released many times. Let's go ahead and talk about the joysticks. They're a little more complex yet again. We start by left-clicking to create a dot, right-clicking to drag that out to create an action. And it's similar to the triggers in that you've got a property box here. You can select which direction you want that stick to be activating. And it's the same thing here. If my first dot is showing that I want the joystick to go down and to the right, it's gradually going to change position out here until at a half a second where the stick will be going up and left. So if you don't want it to gradually change, you'll want to add intermediate dots here. Again, you add those intermediate dots by left clicking. You can bring up these property boxes by left clicking. So by adding these intermediate dots, the change isn't gradual. The stick is going to stay at the lower right, and it'll end up at the lower right here still, and then it's going to quickly change so that you're pushing up and left on the stick, and it's going to stay there until the end of the macro. And one more thing that's interesting here, to simulate the left stick press, there's actually a second track here built within the same track. Same thing with the right stick. That pretty much covers all the basic functions of editing on here. If you'd like to delete a point, click on that point and hit your delete key on the keyboard. And if you don't like the position of an entire action, you can left click, hold, and drag that entire action along the track. And there's a horizontal scroll bar down here. By default, the macro is 2 seconds long, and you can extend that anytime you are dragging an action beyond the 2 seconds or beyond the end of the macro. It will continue to expand. And we've got one more feature to talk about with the macro timeline editor, and that is this gray gear in the upper right hand corner. Device capture ID. If you were recording a macro, that's going to fill in with some information about your gamepad, the date you created it, your name, possibly the file name you'd like to use, some comments. But the most important box to pay attention to is the speed multiplier. By default, it's going to start at 1.0. What this is just telling your controller is how fast do I want to play back that macro. At a speed of 1.0, this macro is going to, I'm going to delete some of these things here and show you an example. Let's go ahead and just press the A button for 1 second. Now let's say you really meant to have the A button pressed for 1.5 seconds. You could either go over here and drag this out farther to 1.5 seconds, or you could change the speed multiplier to 1.5. That just increases the speed that this macro is played at. So really, with the speed multiplier 1.5, you're not playing this for 1 second anymore. You're playing it for 1.5. Or maybe you meant to hold that A button for 10 seconds. So change that speed multiplier to 10. Or maybe you really just wanted this A button held down for half a second. Change that speed multiplier to 0.5. Really, the important thing to remember is, if you've drawn a really complex macro and you're trying to get the timing down just right with your game, you can use this speed multiplier to tweak in how fast it's going to play that back. So maybe a rapid fire, you've made a rapid fire for 10 shots per second for your favorite game, but you've got another game where 9.2 shots per second would work good. You can tune that with a speed multiplier. Fast reload feature for Call of Duty is another good one. So speed multiplier is a pretty advanced feature, but once you really get into editing and tuning these macros for your games, you're going to find a lot of use out of that. And of course, when you're all done with your macro, hit the disk and go ahead and save that to your hard drive. You can share it on our macro library, share it with your friends, just keep it for yourself. And please stay tuned for more tutorial videos in the future. Thanks.